I still remember that morning. After 32 years leading my company, this was officially day one of retirement. I should have been celebrating, right? Instead, I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed at 5 a.m., the same time I'd woken up for decades, completely frozen. My heart was racing, palms sweating, and this overwhelming thought kept circling. Now what? For someone who'd spent their entire adult life defined by their career, by meetings and decisions that impacted hundreds of employees, I suddenly felt invisible. Unnecessary. That morning, anxiety didn't just knock on my door, it broke it down completely. And what happened next would change everything I thought I knew about retirement, purpose, and mental health. You know, they sell us this perfect picture of retirement. Golf courses, beach houses, grandkids, and endless leisure. The golden years, they call it. What they don't tell you is that for many of us, especially those who have built their identity around their work, retirement can trigger a full-blown identity crisis. I was David Reynolds, CEO of Meridian Technologies. That's how I introduced myself at parties. That's what gave me purpose each morning. That's what filled my calendar with meaningful appointments. And suddenly, overnight, that was gone. The statistics actually bear this out, though we rarely discuss them. About 40% of retirees experience some form of depression or anxiety within the first year of retirement. For executives and entrepreneurs, that number jumps even higher. We're simply not prepared for the psychological impact of this massive life transition. Those first few weeks, I maintained a brave face around my wife and family. Enjoying the break, I'd say. Catching up on reading, but inside, I was experiencing anxiety levels I hadn't felt since the company nearly went bankrupt in 2008. Except this time, there was no external crisis to manage. The crisis was entirely within me. By month 2 of retirement, what began as psychological discomfort had transformed into something physical. I'd wake up with this heaviness in my chest. My doctor initially suspected heart problems, not uncommon for a 65-year-old former workaholic. But after extensive tests, his diagnosis was clear: severe anxiety. Your body's stress response is in overdrive, he explained, even though there's no actual threat. I couldn't believe it. I'd navigated corporate takeovers, market crashes, and technological disruptions without breaking a sweat. Yet here I was, physically ill from the simple act of not working. The symptoms were debilitating. Sleep disturbances became my new normal. I'd either lie awake until 3 a.m. or wake up at 4, my mind immediately flooding with a sense of purposelessness. My appetite disappeared. My energy levels plummeted. Even my cognitive function seemed affected. I became forgetful, unfocused. This wasn't just adjustment difficulties. This was my mind and body in revolt. And that's when I realized something had to change. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, about 4 months into retirement. My wife had organized a surprise lunch with former colleagues, people I'd worked alongside for decades. It was meant to be a cheerful reunion. Instead, it became my breaking point. Sitting there listening to them discuss the company's latest projects, the new direction under different leadership, I felt like a ghost at my own funeral. They were moving forward while I was nowhere. Halfway through lunch, I excused myself to the restroom, locked the door, and experienced my first full-blown panic attack. Hyperventilating, sweating, convinced I was having a heart attack, it was terrifying. A lifetime of control and composure shattered in minutes. My wife found me there, slumped against the wall. The look of fear in her eyes. I'll never forget it. That was my wake-up call. This wasn't just about me anymore. My deteriorating mental health was affecting everyone I loved. That evening, after a hard conversation with my wife, I made 2 decisions. First, I would stop pretending everything was fine. Second, I would approach this challenge like any business problem, with research, resources, and a refusal to accept failure as an option. My business background meant research was my natural first step. What I discovered about retirement and mental health was both illuminating and validating. First, I wasn't alone. Studies from the Institute of Economic Affairs found retirement increases the probability of suffering from clinical depression by about 40%. Another study from Harvard showed that having a purpose in life actually creates physical resilience in aging adults. Those with clear purpose literally lived longer, healthier lives. What particularly struck me was research showing that the psychological impact of retirement varies dramatically based on how voluntary it feels. Those forced into retirement by health issues or corporate downsizing suffered more than those who chose their timing. While I had technically chosen my retirement date, emotionally it had felt inevitable, a surrender to age rather than a positive choice. Most fascinating was the neurological research. Our brains are wired for purpose and engagement. Without them, certain neural pathways begin to atrophy. Essentially, the use it or lose it principle applies not just to muscles, but to our cognitive and emotional well-being. For someone who'd prided himself on being rational and informed, these discoveries were humbling. How had I prepared so meticulously for the financial aspects of retirement while completely overlooking the psychological dimensions? Armed with this research, I tried the standard recommendations. Perhaps you've heard them too. Find a hobby, they said. So I took up golf, something I'd occasionally enjoyed during working life. But 4 hours chasing a little white ball couldn't fill the void left by leading a dynamic organization. Volunteer was another suggestion. I joined the board of a local nonprofit, but quickly found myself frustrated by their inefficient processes and my limited ability to implement change. Travel more, my wife and I planned a European river cruise. Wild. Temporarily distracting, the emptiness returned as soon as we got home. Beautiful scenery couldn't answer my fundamental question of purpose. Spend time with grandkids. This was genuinely joyful but also sporadic. My adult children had their own busy lives, and being grandpa a few times a month wasn't enough to rebuild my identity. Each of these conventional approaches offered temporary relief, but failed to address the core issue. They were activities, not purpose. Distractions, not meaning. What? I needed something more fundamental, more transformative. My breakthrough came from the most unlikely source. At my lowest point, my 28-year-old daughter convinced me to attend a weekend mindfulness retreat. To be honest, I went mostly to appease her. Meditation and mindfulness seemed like New Age nonsense to my analytically trained mind, certainly not solutions for a former CEO battling retirement anxiety. The retreat was held at a simple mountain facility, no luxury accommodations or gourmet meals. Just basic rooms, healthy food, and a program designed to teach presence and awareness. My initial skepticism was overwhelming. The first session nearly broke me. Sitting still for 30 minutes, focusing only on my breath. My mind raced. With judgments, escape plans, and a growing certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake. But something the instructor said caught my attention. Notice your thoughts without becoming them. This simple instruction, to observe my thinking rather than being consumed by it, was revolutionary. For decades, I'd been identifying completely with my thoughts, particularly those about my career and status. If I thought I'm no longer valuable without my position, that became my reality, not just a thought to examine. By the second day, something shifted. During a guided meditation on identity, I experienced a moment of clarity that I can only describe as transformative. I realized I had completely fused my sense of self with my professional role. Without that role, I'd lost not just a job, but my entire self-concept. The insight wasn't just intellectual, it was visceral. For the first time in months, I could breathe fully. The constant chest tightness released. Something fundamental had changed. Returning home from the retreat, I didn't experience some magical cure. The anxiety didn't disappear overnight, but I now had a completely different relationship with it. Instead of seeing anxiety as an enemy to battle or suppress, I began to view it as information, a signal pointing toward areas of my life that needed attention. When anxiety spiked during empty mornings, it wasn't just torturing me, it was highlighting my need for structure and purpose. I developed a daily mindfulness practice, just 20 minutes each morning. Nothing elaborate, just sitting quietly, observing my breath and thoughts. This simple routine created a foundation that helped stabilize my nervous system. More importantly, I learned to recognize anxiety's physical signatures in my body: the tightened shoulders, the shallow breathing, the racing heart. By catching these signals early, I could intervene before spiraling into panic. This approach is actually supported by neuroscience. Research shows that naming emotions activates the prefrontal cortex and calms the amygdala, essentially engaging our rational brain to soothe our emotional brain. Simply saying to myself, "I'm experiencing anxiety right now," created distance and perspective. I also discovered that anxiety and excitement create identical physical sensations. The only difference is how we interpret them. By consciously reframing some of my anxiety as excitement about new possibilities, the same physical sensations became less threatening. This cognitive reframing wasn't about positive thinking or denying reality. It was about questioning the stories my mind created and asking if they served me. Was it really true that I had nothing to contribute in retirement? Or was that just a habitual thought pattern? With my anxiety more manageable, I could finally address the deeper question: what gives life meaning when you're no longer defined by your job title? The answer emerged gradually, through experimentation rather than analysis. Instead of trying to replace my CEO role with something equally prestigious, I began exploring activities purely based on interest and engagement. I revisited long-abandoned interests. In college, before the demands of career and family, I'd been passionate about photography. Now I picked up a camera again. Not to become a professional photographer or to achieve anything specific, simply for the joy of seeing the world through a different lens. This led to volunteering with a conservation organization, documenting wildlife in local wetlands. Unlike my previous attempts at volunteering, this wasn't about lending my executive expertise. It was about being a beginner, learning new skills, and contributing in ways that had nothing to do with my former status. Another unexpected source of purpose came through mentoring. Not formal business mentoring as I'd initially attempted, but working with first-generation college students navigating academic and career challenges. Their fresh perspectives and determination energized me, while my life experience genuinely helped them. The relationship was reciprocal rather than hierarchical. I also discovered the concept of generativity, psychologist Erik Erikson's term for the drive to guide younger generations and leave a positive legacy. Research shows generativity is a powerful predictor of well-being in older adults. By focusing outward on others' growth rather than inward on my lost status, my perspective shifted dramatically. The common thread in these new pursuits wasn't prestige or achievement, it was engagement. I found that when fully absorbed in an activity, whether photography, mentoring, or even learning to cook, the anxious voice in my head quieted. Psychologists call this flow state, and cultivating it became central to my new life. Perhaps the most surprising change came in my personal relationships. Throughout my career, relationships had often been instrumental, valued for their utility in achieving business goals. Even family time had been carefully scheduled between work commitments. In retirement, I discovered relationship for its own sake. Without the constant pressure of work deadlines, I could be fully present with my wife, children, and grandchildren. I began to know them as complete people, not just in their relationship to me. My marriage transformed. My wife and I had to rediscover each other after decades of organizing our lives around my career. Initially awkward and sometimes tense, This process eventually deepened our connection beyond what I thought possible after 40 years together. Male friendships, which had mostly revolved around business relationships, required particular attention. Research shows social isolation is a significant risk for retired men, who often lose their primary social network when leaving work. I made conscious efforts to maintain and deepen friendships, learning to connect around more than just work topics. These strengthened relationships became my most reliable anxiety buffer. Neuroscience confirms that positive social connection literally calms our nervous system through the release of oxytocin. The people I'd often been too busy for during my working years became central to my well-beings. So here I am, 3 years into retirement, speaking to you not as a former CEO, but simply as a fellow traveler on this journey through life's transitions. The anxiety that once threatened to ruin my retirement hasn't disappeared completely. It still visits occasionally. But it no longer controls me or defines this chapter of my life. What I've learned is that retirement isn't just a financial transition, it's an existential one. It asks fundamental questions about who we are beyond our work identities, what gives life meaning, and how we want to spend our remaining years. The solution to retirement anxiety isn't found in perfect planning or conventional activities. It emerges through a willingness to face difficult emotions, question limiting beliefs, and experiment with new sources of meaning and engagement. If you're approaching retirement, already retired, or supporting someone through this transition, I hope my story offers some reassurance. The psychological challenges are real, but so are the opportunities for growth and reinvention. With the right mindset and tools, retirement can truly become not the end of purpose, but the beginning of a new, equally meaningful chapter. For those currently struggling with retirement anxiety, remember this: your value was never actually in your job title. It was always in your humanity, your capacity for connection, contribution, and growth. That capacity doesn't diminish with retirement, it just finds new expressions. If you found this helpful, please subscribe to our channel for more conversations about navigating life's transitions with greater awareness and purpose. And share your own experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what another person needs to hear today. Thank you for listening to mine.